Hello everyone, Earl Henderson, Primordial Defense. Thank you for watching. So I did a review on the Houston Police Lakewood Church active shooter incident, and I had talked about some security stuff related to this incident. Talked about how the church had their security personnel, talked about some security measures and whatnot, but didn't really go into a whole lot of stuff. So I want to take this video to talk about planning for events. This can be used for church security. This can be used for concert security, smaller events. Like sorority, fraternity type events, etc. Anything where there's going to be an event going on. And it may be a one-time event, or it may be a recurring thing. So going back to church security, every Sunday you're going to have church, right? So that's going to be a recurring thing. And this event planning for security can be utilized to help make things smoother, gets everybody on the same page, and just overall improves your security plan. So one of the things that I'll be talking about is the special events contingency planning from FEMA. I can also briefly talk about the planning and managing security for major special events, guidelines for law enforcement. Even though this is a guidelines for law enforcement, it can still be used by private entities because it still has a good amount of information in there, and a lot of the information kind of mirrors this document here, the special events contingency planning. Another thing to talk about is incident command and your span of control. So when you go into your security planning, you have to have the people who are going to be in charge having knowledge of the incident command system and the flow chart of how things can go. And this can be pretty simple for a very small venue, a very small event. You may have one person that kind of plays multiple different roles, or depending on the complexity of the event, you can have multiple people staffed into different roles, and this kind of helps you manage the entire event by the one person in charge, or it's a joint command thing, who is going to be over people who are part of planning, operations, logistics, etc. And a good framework for that is free, and it comes from FEMA. It's known as the ICS and NIMS courses. So what I would recommend is the ICS 100, an introduction to the incident command system. That will kind of give you a pretty good overview of how that's utilized. ICS 200 is another good one. The 700s, it's okay, and 800 is okay. It's not something that's totally necessary, but it does give you some good information about the incident command system. The 300 and 400 they're good courses. These are actually in-person courses. The 100, 200, 700, 800, those are online. You can take those for free and get your little certificate and get your knowledge and everything. The 300 and 400, those are in-person classes, and those are typically reserved for command level type of personnel. I've taken these classes, and like most things out there as far as classes go, it can really depend on the instructor. The instructors that I had were the type of instructors to read verbatim every freaking word on a slide and then not expound upon very much after that, and then click next and then read verbatim everything on the next slide. We call that death by PowerPoint, and it was a very grueling experience for those classes, because those classes are like 2 or 3 days long, and it was I did not like it. And in fact, I made a funny little video after, I think it was the ICS 400 class, After I completed the class, you get the certificate and everything. I took the certificate and I made a little video setting that damn thing on fire because I hated that class so much. It was just so boring, and mostly because of the instructor. The instructor just sucked. The content was good, having the manual and everything, big book. Some of the tabletop exercises, even though the instructors kind of sucked at leading it and everything, the tabletop exercises were still pretty good, and in getting you in that mindset of managing large operations. These other ones here, the 191, the 402, and the 2300, again, they're free. These would have good content in them. They're not necessarily something that I would say, take first, but definitely the 100 and the 200 take first, as those would be most beneficial to you. The rest of this stuff is just going to be extra icing on the cake and getting you kind of more squared away on how to use the incident command system. Now, with that being said, a lot of public safety agencies don't always fully utilize the entire ICS system. The only time you see the full ICS system being utilized is for very large, complex operations. That's typically going to be for like search and rescue type of scenarios. You have wide area searches. You have multiple resources, multiple entities involved, and you will likely see all those positions, most of those positions, being staffed. You would have someone who's actually, in charge of finance. There's a, dedicated person. That's all they do is finance stuff. And then, logistics. You have different people under logistics because that in and of itself is a crucial part of the overall operation. Going into kind of like large scale, like wildfire type of incidents, you'd see that. Large scale disasters, things like that. That's where you start to see the full ICS system come into play. When it comes to your normal, everyday, all hazard stuff, car wrecks, house fire, stuff like that. And then for the law enforcement side, smaller scale incidents, you don't see all those positions being staffed. Some of the functions and stuff are being done by one or two people, and so they kind of wear multiple hats. But as the incidents become more complex, you can actually see more of the functions of the ICS coming into play, and having people who are actually dedicated to certain things within ICS. When it comes to large event planning, this is something that can be utilized, but unless it's governmental agencies doing it, then you may not see the exact ICS system framework being utilized, but you may see some kind of variation or work up towards it. When you look at things like the Super Bowl is a large event, and they have pretty much almost all those ICS positions staffed, and well in advance of the actual Super Bowl date occurring. So usually about almost a year before the event occurs, that's when the planning starts. And as you get closer and closer to the start date, you start filling in different roles. People start taking on some of the more operational stuff, and you have multiple entities involved. And so if you do the research on Super Bowl security and stuff like that, you'll see a lot of this stuff coming into play. Now, when it comes to private security and private events and whatnot, they may or may not know some of these things, but they may do some things that are kind of similar to it. So I'll jump out of this, and then I will go into this right here and talk about planning for a large event. Okay, so special events contingency planning. So here on the table of contents, you can kind of look at the breakdown of how everything's going to go. So pre-event planning, that is probably one of the most important things when it comes to having a successful event. Pre-event planning, having all your ducks in a row before the show starts. This is probably where a lot of failures occur at events, is where people don't plan for things. They may plan for a couple things, but because they haven't thought about, well, what if XYZ happens to this? There's no plan in place, and then you start to see a breakdown of operational type of things. People starting to get confused and frustrated and just don't know how to deal with something because they just haven't thought about it, and there was nothing in place to do it. So pre-event planning is probably one of the most important things when it comes to having a successful event. The event operational considerations, and we'll get into all these different things as we go through this. And I already kind of really talked about incident command and control. We'll go over more a little bit about it, and then some additional planning considerations for special events. And then your post-event actions, your after action review, getting everyone together and talking about things that went right, things that went wrong, how you could change things for the next event to make things smooth a lot slower. The demobilization of everything. So, you have the pre-event planning that goes on. You got the event that's occurring, and now the event is over. What plan is in place to demobilize? So you may have a lot of things or a lot of people who are not going to be there once the show is over, so to speak. But you're still going to have people there who need to take things down, take things apart, get the place restored back to normal. So that right there is going to be a part of the planning for this event. But one of the most important things out of this will be the after action review. Identifying, like I said, things that worked well, things that didn't work well. That way, when you do the next event, things go a lot smoother and everyone is better and more safe. So, talking about planning meetings for special events. So, this is something that's important to do. You've got to meet with people before the event occurs. Depending on what kind of events going on, you may need to be, well, for sure, not may, but you for sure need to be meeting with the person who's putting it on, right? Like the head honcho of whatever this entity is. Meeting with them. Identifying, what security needs there are. And they may already have in mind what kind of security needs they want. But they also may not even know what other needs they may have because they haven't thought about those things. And so as a good security professional, or even, if you're from the law enforcement side and you're having to partake in planning for events, there may be things from a security standpoint, safety and security standpoint, that these people just haven't thought about. When it comes to like music concerts and stuff like that, people who put those type of events on, from my experience, you'll have people who are like promoters and whatnot for these things, and these people they're motivated by money. And so a lot of times they will go with a cheaper security option. And that cheaper security option may not involve any pre-event planning on their end. They'll just be given a date to show up, and then they show up, and then they get told what to do by the event organizer or the promoter of the event. And sometimes, things work out. Things are, they run smoothly, but they are banking off of fortuitous outcomes. They just get lucky that nothing bad and critical happens, and they see that as a overall success in how they have conducted themselves. Oh, no one died, or no major things happened. We did everything right. When in reality, no, they have not done everything right because they never did any pre-event planning. And if something were to happen, it would be a catastrophic failure on their end because they wouldn't know how to properly respond to things or anything like that. So there are large events out there where proper planning is not being done. They're not reaching out to local government. They're not getting any input from local police or EMS, fire, anything like that. They just, they rent a venue, whether it's a convention center or like a civic group that has, a big building, something like a VFW lodge or like a JC's group or some other kind of large civic group that has like a large building or something. They'll rent the building out to people for different parties or music type of events, and these people will they'll do the planning on getting the sound equipment and everything else there, getting the performer there, and they'll reach out to security and say, hey, we got this event. It's gonna be this many people, and of course, they mostly always try to go with the lowest amount of security to save money, and then they will have security come out. Sometimes you may have some of these private security people, actually come out to the location and kind of give it a look over, see what's going on. A lot of times they're just not doing that. They just show up, do their thing, and then leave. So, aside from meeting with the event organizer, whoever's going to be putting stuff on, you may also need to be meeting with perhaps or having a telephonic meeting or a Zoom meeting or something with like the manager of the performer, or depending on how big the performer is, you may actually be able to talk to the performer themselves and kind of lay some groundwork down, talk about some expectations, tell them, hey, if this happens, this is what we're going to do. This is what we expect you to do. Little things like that. It can go into meeting with your local governmental entities, having a briefing of sorts for local police, letting them, one, know that there's a large event going on. Some agencies, they may collect information on a pretty good basis, and they may already know about the event, or they're so busy and stuff, things just haven't popped up on their radar, and they may not know that there's this large music thing going on. And if they knew about it, they would plan accordingly, and they would have additional officers scheduled for that weekend. Same with the fire and EMS. If they know about this thing going on and they think that there could be something going on, they may plan ahead for that and have some additional resources scheduled to be working that weekend, which would be good in the event that something were bad to happen and you needed a lot of cops and a lot of EMS people to come to this event. If nobody knew about it and staffing was as normal as any other weekend and some type of incident occurred, there may not be enough resources there from first responders to be able to adequately handle that scenario. So, meeting with your governmental entities, going into large events, like festivals and stuff, where you're going to have trash, and everything, you may be needing to meet with someone who's going to be in charge of the waste management and talking about the safety and security of that. Going into credentialing. So, credentialing for the events. There may be one person in charge of being a point of contact for all of the performers who may be coming to this, and meeting with that person and talking about the credentials that the band people are going to need to have. And when it comes to music stuff, probably one of the biggest headaches is the bands themselves. Well, not so much always the bands themselves, but like they're freaking groupies, right? Like they're the girlfriends and the family members and the best friends who want to come out there with them and say they're with the band, but they don't actually have a function within that thing. They're just a groupie. They're a follower. So meeting with that point of contact who's going to be talking to all the bands and laying down the groundwork and explaining like, hey, in order to be backstage, people are going to have credentials. They're going to have this lanyard around their neck. We're not going to play this game of just because they know someone with the band or because the guitarist knows someone, they can say that someone can come in. No, like there's a capacity limit on how many people can be back here. Depending on, the staging, it could be a certain stage setup where the backstage area is going to be at, and it's still a part of that structure, that scaffolding or whatever. There may be a weight limit on that. So when you start putting all this equipment on there, speakers and all the band equipment, and then you got your band members and stuff like that, and then you start getting a bunch of groupies hanging out, and they're getting up on stage and everything too. Now you're starting to reach the limits of the structural strength of that staging equipment, and you get too much weight on there, something breaks and buckles, the whole damn stage will collapse. So it's important to lay that groundwork for these band members, and basically telling them, hey, you just can't have all your friends come out, hang out behind stage. There's going to be a limited number of people back here, etc. And then those are those issues right there. If it's going to be an alcohol related event, where there's going to be serving of alcohol, talking to who's in charge of the food and beverage aspect of this, getting with that person, coming up with a plan on how people are going to be identified as being able to consume alcohol. If it's an event where it's going to be 21 up and only, that makes it kind of easy, because at the screening process of getting in, everyone who's coming in the building has to be 21. But if it's something where minors and everything can come in, well, then you need to have a good credentialing plan for people who are going to be consuming alcohol. So the event people themselves, they may have already identified, we're going to do the wristbands, we're going to check IDs, etc. Okay, that's great. But one thing that I have found that has been an issue in the past with the event people doing IDs themselves is, well, number one, they don't do a very good job of checking stuff. But then number two, they're typically lazy and they just hand the wristband to them and then let them walk away. Well, that person can then just turn around and give that wristband to an underage person and then go back and be like, hey, I never got a wristband. Here's my ID. And then they get another wristband. So making sure that those people are applying the wristbands themselves to these people that they've checked their IDs on. If the security provider themselves is going to be the ones tasked with that responsibility, then again, meeting with the food and beverage person who's in charge, and then also the overall event organizer, and identifying what the wristband is going to look like. And then from the security standpoint, I think the security provider should be the one to purchase, well, obviously being reimbursed for purchasing them, but be the ones who actually obtain the wristbands and have a specialized wristband that is unique, that can't be easily counterfeited by the local populace. Because when a security company gets into the role of checking IDs for alcohol consumption, etc., that can then open them up to some criminal and civil liabilities if a bunch of underage people are caught by local police or the state ABC officers. So meeting with different people for various reasons like that, and getting things laid out and put in place so that when it comes to the operation standpoint, things go smoothly or more smoother. And aside from just the security standpoint of doing these meetings, going back to the event organizer, if they are doing these things or they're having someone in charge of doing the planning phase of all this, this is stuff that they could be doing. They could be setting up meetings with the local waste management company. They got a garbage company who's going to come out and empty dumpsters, X times a day because they're going to be accumulating so much trash. Having people identified who are going to be, within this campground or this venue who are going to be going around collecting trash out of trash cans, and then getting them to a collection point so that they can be picked up by the actual garbage company. So there's all that planning that goes into place. Stuff like porta potties and stuff like that, having a plan in place on having those out there, and then not just having those out there, but how is the porta potty truck going to get back there and empty these things and do what they need to do. So the positioning of these things needs to be thought about, where it's going to be placed at, so that support vehicles and everything can get to it and do their thing. If you put it in a place where those vehicles can get to it, well, those porta potties are going to get full of shit and they're not going to be emptied out, and it's not going to be a good thing, especially if you got multiple days going on. The first aid EMS standpoint. So, and this could fall under security. Doing safety and security planning, but reaching out, identifying health concerns, safety concerns for this event. If it's going to be in the summer, it's like a music festival or something like that. Dehydration is something to be concerned about. So potentially having hydration stations set up throughout the thing so people can go up there and get water more easily. Having staff and workers aware of what heat stress or heat injuries can look like, so that they themselves are staying hydrated and are not succumbing to heat injuries, but then also they can watch the attendees and make sure that no one who's attending this thing is falling victim to some type of heat injury. So there's that meeting and aspect of it. And then for the fire departments, it could be meeting with the fire department and talking about entry points. If there's a campground thing going on, all right, well, this is a back entrance to the venue, this is how the fire trucks can come in if freaking campers catch on fire or something like that. So, like I said, lots of different entities to be meeting with, and going over these things for the planning of the event. And it can even, depending on the size of the event, it can even be so far as meeting with like AT&T or other providers to have like cell towers right there at the location so that cell coverage is available. If there's going to be some more power needs or anything like that, it could be having to have either permanent power infrastructure put in to come in, or something like a temporary kind of thing to be able to provide power to the event. So the promoter and the sponsors, like I said, they will oftentimes not even think about stuff like this. So when it comes to the smaller scale stuff, they just let things slide. Like, they don't think about this stuff for the most part. They may think about some of the things like the porta johns and stuff like that, but a lot of the stuff they just kind of skip it. Now when it starts becoming a large enough event, it's mixing into actual public space versus private space. They're basically renting out or having blocked off a downtown area, certain streets, stuff like that. And then you start to have some more governmental oversight, and the police department may be getting involved in looking at this stuff and thinking about security and safety and stuff like that. And then you start getting into this stuff where things are getting planned out. I wish that there was something in place, like a law, that would force promoters and sponsors for these private events to go over safety and security planning. Um, you have historical events, like the nightclub fires, the big concert. I think it was like back in the 70s. I think it was the Who concert where a big event occurred, and people were trampled to death. You know, and in response to that, that local government there had changed some laws and had something to do with the seating. I forgot exactly what it was that they made a ordinance change or law change on, but it kind of changed the way seating and everything was done for concerts and everything in that area. But if the promoters and sponsors have been forced to go into planning and stuff like this, potentially those things would not have occurred. And there wouldn't be a need to have this knee-jerk reaction to create some, weird law about, seating or whatever. The nightclub fire where the sparkler things were being set off and it caught the stuff on fire. If someone would have been in charge of safety and security planning and everything like that, they would have identified that, hey, this is probably not a good idea to have this freaking sparkler thing that touches the freaking ceiling or hits these curtains be positioned in here or utilized right here. You need to tone it down, get a different device that doesn't throw so many sparks out, etc. So a lot of the problems will go back to the promoter and the sponsor of the event, because they just don't typically look at these things. The laws and regulations for stuff. So, talking about filing of applications and stuff like that, that kind of goes back into if you're going to be doing a block party kind of thing, having a certain, road shut down or having the downtown area shut down or whatever, the roadways at least. And then, the insurance bond liability issues, certain statutes in place. You got to have someone who's knowledgeable of certain laws. Really going back into fire code, safety and prevention stuff. Capacity, right? Like, what's the capacity of this building? You don't need to be going over capacity. Going back into what I was talking about with the sparkler things, it may be against a law to have something like that indoors, or it may be against an ordinance to have something like that indoors. So you have to know, have a pretty good knowledge of what your statutes are, what your ordinances are when it comes to certain things for different events. And another thing too, kind of going into a little bit of the laws, regulations, and legal stuff, is the location of where this thing is at. So I've had one client who puts on events at a certain property, and the certain property is a mix of city and county. It's dead smack in the middle of the city. But there has recently been some back and forth between the city police and the sheriff's office on who is actually responsible for responding to this property. Used to be always it was city police who were going out there. But now they're kind of kicking that back to the sheriff's office and saying, well, this is technically county property. You need to be responding to it versus city police going to it. Kind of bullcrap, in my opinion. But that's something to think about. Where are the jurisdictional lines? Who is going to be coming to this location in the event that something happens? And with that being said, you may also have to think about sound ordinances. If it's within the city or if it's out in the county, there may be no sound ordinance whatsoever there. or other ordinances that could be in place. Going into attendee crowd issues, talking about different types of crowds and whatnot, panics and crazes. That's an important thing to be thinking about depending on the type of event that's going to be going on, and or the type of people that are being attracted to this thing. So if it's going to be something like a protest or something like that, obviously there will be more governmental oversight in the planning of this or whatever. But those kind of crowds, it's going to be more of a tumultuous kind of crowd there. They're going to be hyped up. They're going to be very emotional and sensational and stuff. And the risk of aggressive behavior is increased when it comes to stuff like that. A music concert, well, it really depends on the music concert. But if it's something like like a Taylor Swift kind of thing, or country music, those things, although they're not completely void of violence or anything, there can still be some aggression out of some people, especially if there's going to be a lot of alcohol and stuff involved. But typically not a whole lot of aggression, violence issues. Now you change the type of music genre and you go into a hip hop rap kind of venue, well then your chances of bad stuff happening are actually increasing, because the rap stuff is a lot more violent in nature, and it tends to attract more violent minded people. So having a good knowledge of the crowd that's coming and crowd dynamics can go a long way. Into good planning, and having all different types of people who are going to be working this event educated on things to look for, like pre-assault indicators, stuff like that. That way they can communicate that to appropriate people to get security involved or get law enforcement involved, and keep these things from flaring up. Into more crowd stuff. So pretty good information to have right there. Talking about ticket collectors and doorways, the corridors, walkways, stairs, escalators, stuff like that. So when it comes to the ticket collecting location, screening locations, etc., identifying where this is going to occur at, setting up the barrier poles, the VIP ropes, whatever, getting those things set up to get your crowd control in place. Create those cattle chutes, so to speak, to funnel people in through certain ways, and have them organized and maintained in a better way. Identifying the need for X amount of security personnel to be in a certain area to kind of oversee this stuff, because depending on the event, you may be having people trying to sneak in and not pay a ticket. Also, depending on the event, you may need to be doing bag checks, and depending on the event, the bag checks may be just really for making sure people aren't bringing in food and beverage, which is really the main reason why so many sponsors and promoters, want bag checks. They'll put up this reason, for safety, make sure no one's bringing any guns in, but then they won't want any pat downs being done. Like if you were really concerned about weapons being brought in, you'd have security patting people down, but instead you're just concerned about sales, and you just want bags checked to make sure food and beverage aren't being brought in. But other events may require airport style security checkpoints where people are being bag checked. Certain bags may not even be allowed to be brought in past a certain size, but bags that can be brought in being fully checked, people are being patted down, walking through metal detectors, being wanded with metal detector, etc. So wherever these doorways and stuff like that is going to go, identifying these things and seeing how the layout's going to go, and how many people are going to be needed for those locations. Criminal terrorist risks. So that's something else to be thinking about. Like I mentioned, like a rap concert thing. There's going to be a increased risk of crimes occurring at this venue. Not just inside, but also outside, because a lot of people these rap events I've noticed they like to hang out outside. I don't know why. Like, there's no show going on outside. There's no entertainer outside, but a lot of people like to hang out outside. And a lot of that's because they like to consume their own alcohol beverage that's in their vehicle, or smoke their own stuff without being what they would call being harassed while inside. So the opportunity for criminal things going on out in the parking lot can be at a higher risk for certain events. Terrorist risks, so like the Super Bowl, that is an event where the risk of terrorism is really high. It's a very highly publicized event. It's very popular. Lots of news coverage on it, and a lot of people are going to be there. So that makes it a pretty good prime target for any would-be terrorists to want to attack, because lots of people are going to see it. It's going to be highly televised, and they can get their message across a lot easier at a big event like that versus going to some small little town in some state and attacking the freaking VFW lodge where some little concert's being held, some small scale concerts being held. Talk about critical infrastructures, key assets, motives, weaknesses, contemporary terrorism. So a lot of this planning stuff, like I said, is scalable depending on the size of the event and the complexity of it. Going into operational considerations, um, things to think about, things to have plans for. If you're in a coastal, kind of area down south, hurricanes, that's something to be thinking about. Do you have to be worrying about hurricanes in Kansas? No. But you may have to be worrying about tornadoes, right? So, depending on the time of the year, that may be something that you have to add into your contingency plan. Another time of the year, probably not, because the chances of it occurring are pretty low. An airplane crash. So, that may not be something that everyone has to plan for. One of the big events that I did last year, they had a helicopter on site doing helicopter rentals, doing little rides, go up in the air for a little bit and come back down. So had to come up with an aircraft crash plan. What to do if the helicopter crashes on the property. What is everyone's role and responsibility? What is security going to be doing? What are event staff going to be doing? What if the helicopter crashes outside of the property? What are people going to be doing at that point? Where on the property, if it crashes, what happens? Going into those different planning ideas, different contingencies, and knowing what exactly to do in the event that something happens. An avalanche. Well, not very many places are going to have to worry about a concern for avalanche. Going into these other different things, the chances of them being more concerned are higher. Like credentials for a large event, that's always going to be an important thing. How are people going to be coming in? How are we going to be identifying people where they need to be at? Do they have a backstage pass? Are they supposed to be in the VIP area? Are they supposed to be contained to the general admission area, etc.? So, this one's going to be fully important all across the board. But then you start getting into other stuff like a dam failure. I mean, some of these things are going to be very low. Some of them are going to be in the middle. Some are going to be pretty high. Fire is something that should be pretty high. First aid should be pretty high. Um, if it's a large enough event, the human waste disposal stuff, that's going to be an important thing to be considering. If it's going to be a large enough event and it's going to be a whole family kind of thing, what about little children? So that's one thing I don't think a lot of people think about. And this event that I did last year, it was a big family event, and all kinds of kids were there. They had little bouncy houses and stuff like that, and so came up with a plan for a lost child. What happens when there's a lost child? Kind of basically going into a code atom. At that point, security knows to go lock down all the entry points, and to heavily screen or stop people from leaving, which that kind of gets into the legal thing. You can't really stop people from leaving, right? If someone wants to leave, they can leave. You can't hold them there because that's unlawful imprisonment. But you can do things to slow people leaving. You can park a vehicle in the thing, like, oh, sorry, this vehicle won't start. Hang out while we try to get it started and moved out of the way. Slowing people down, stuff like that. Looking at ways to, look at vehicles, try to look inside vehicles as they're leaving, and even telling people, hey, we got a missing kid. You care? We look in your trunk real quick, make sure you don't have a kid in there. Doing things like that for a lost child, planning. Dissemination of information. How are we going to get the picture of the lost kid out there to everybody? What is non-security people going to be doing? Food vendors, what are they going to be doing? Performers, stuff like that, what are they going to be doing? At what point do we stop the show and start calling the kid's name out on the loudspeakers to tell them to come to stage or whatever? So, a multi-layered approach to a lost or missing kid in the event that happens. Media relations. So depending on the size of the event, that may be something that you have to have someone in charge of, being a public information officer. And then also in the plan, you don't want everybody talking about the event, and so you may have a media plan where everyone is told, don't talk to media, don't make any statements, you're not authorized to speak on behalf of the organization or the event or whatever. These people are identified as being ones who can go talk to media, because you certainly don't want the dummy of the whole shebang getting on the news and just making everyone look incredibly stupid. Parking for large events is another important thing. And especially depending on, things to think about, like, where are these vehicles going to be parking at? Are they going to be parking in a field? Well, if they're going to be parking in a field, well, you need to make sure that grass is cut before that event starts. Because if you got vehicles that have been running for a minute and then they pull in this field and park, and the grass is tall enough to where it's touching the undercarriage of the vehicle and the conditions are dry enough, you can start a field fire with all these vehicles out there. So that's going back into pre-event planning. Identifying, hey, someone needs to go out there and mow that field a day before the event or 2 days before the event, whatever, to make sure that grass is going to be short enough to where you decrease your chances of any field fires occurring. Security obviously is going to have to be a pretty high thing to be thinking about and considering. Structural collapse, going back into the stages and stuff, how some of these things are made. If it's a temporary stage, they have to build it or whatever, it's going to have a weight capacity on it. So you can't be having a whole bunch of people there. Going down the list here, ticketing, again, that's something to be thinking about. Traffic control, that can be a significant thing. So that kind of goes a little bit into parking, but it can be its own separate thing depending on where the event and everything's going to be at. So if it's going to be involving city streets and stuff like that, typically the police department's going to be involved in that. But you could also have private entities in charge of traffic control as well. Someone sitting at at an intersection, making sure that people aren't driving past barricades, because you just can't rely on barricades. Because how many times have you seen in the news a road has been flooded and there's, road flooded, there's cones and stuff out in the road, there's the barricade thing set up. How many times have you seen people move those freaking things out of the way, drive down the road, and then flood their car? So you can't just rely on a traffic barrier, because people will get out and move those damn things, and because they're important, right? Like, they're so important, they can bypass traffic barriers and get to where they need to go. So if it's you may have volunteers working at this event, and so you may have a volunteer person sitting at an intersection making sure that people don't drive past the barricade. Um, Depending on the event, you may have a long a drive, or not drive, but like a driveway entry point that may have different little pull offs or whatever. Having people out there directing vehicles to come down this certain lane, and then start filling up vehicles in a certain parking area over in here, and then boom, start filling up over this other area, whatever. Um, yeah. So moving on past these. Indoor events versus outdoor events. So that can change how planning and everything is going to occur. It may also change requirements for how many people you're going to need. It may change how you plan certain things as far as your safety and security stuff goes. Emergency evacuation. So that's another thing to be thinking about. How are you going to safely communicate to people that they need to leave? Making sure that exits are clear, making sure that the sponsor or the promoter hasn't locked exits, because they were cheap and didn't want to hire a bunch of security, so they went to these exits and then bolted them shut, chained them shut, to get away with having to pay someone to stand there, which unfortunately has happened. I had one client one time, several years back. The exit door to the back of the building, there were people being snuck in through that way, and they they put a one of those latches on the door and put a padlock on there. And I looked at that and I said, "You can't be doing this crap. Well, there's a fire, and then no one's going to get out, and then they're going to die." It's like, I cannot, in good faith, allow this to occur. Like, you're going to have to take this off. I didn't want to, but basically came out and I had to, I wouldn't say threaten them, but properly educate them on what would happen to them from a criminal standpoint, and then also from their regulation standpoint. If the fire marshal did come in there and look, that would be something that would be a hefty fine, and or potentially cause them to have to shut the place down at night, or during the day. So emergency evacuation in the event of you know active shooter. What if it's a outdoor event and a lightning storm comes through? Where are your emergency shelters? Where can people go to get out from the elements, etc.? Low capacity, high profile, controversial events, protesters. So for the most part, a lot of this stuff will occur in public spaces, and that's going to most likely be involving governmental entities, most likely involving police. But there are, instances where private security can be employed in these type of things. They're just obviously limited on what they can do, because if it's in a public space and someone's out there protesting, you just can't tell people to leave a public place. You can't tell someone to get off the sidewalk, right? Not even police can typically police can't even do that. But if this event organizer is having a little parade, they're having a little gathering or whatever, security can obviously keep them protected, right? If they start getting attacked and stuff like that. But when it comes to high profile controversial events, the planning stuff that comes into play is, for one, identifying what kind of controversial thing it is, and where it's going to be at, and you can get a gauge on whether or not it's likely to have a higher increased chance of violence, or if it's just going to be a bunch of heckling and stuff like that. Um, Planning stuff, having people in the event being properly educated beforehand for like de-escalation stuff. Don't be in, just because someone's heckling you doesn't, it's not normally going to do you any good to respond back to those people and try to correct them on some things that they may be saying, because there's nothing you say is going to be able to change their mindset. Nothing you say is going to make them say, "Oh, you know what? You're right. I was wrong." Right? Like, they're always going to be right. They're never going to be wrong. So talking to them is like trying to talk to a brick wall. Getting into power struggles over, someone having their phone out and recording you. You're in a public space. Yeah, you may not like it. It may make you uncomfortable. It may annoy you, but you're in a public space. Like, you cannot do anything about someone putting the phone uh, at you and recording you. So, educating people on that kind of stuff, making sure they don't fall into that power struggle of telling someone not to be recording them when they really have no say on whether or not they can be recorded or not. Um, so, different things to go into consideration for planning for things like that. Spectator management, crowd control. Identifying your general mission areas, your VIP areas, backstage areas, stuff like that. And that kind of really goes back into credentialing, but also how to control the flow of people into those certain areas, having certain barriers set up, having certain, um, I call them cow chutes, cattle chutes or whatever, funneling people into a certain area with, bike racks or the ropes or whatever. Entrances and exits, for indoor events. That's an important thing to take into consideration for your planning, um, especially for music events, especially for rap ones. All doors need to be covered. Like, there needs to be a person at each door at a rap concert, um, especially the back doors, um, because people will try to sneak in through that way, and not pay to get in. But more importantly, because you could have people sneaking in through these areas and they're unchecked, they have not gone through the screening process. They could be bringing weapons in. Um, when it comes to the back entrance for performers and stuff like that, having a plan in place to check them as well. Like, I don't care that you're the performer. I don't care that this entourage is with you. Your bags are getting checked. I don't care who you are, especially when it comes to rappers, because their entourage is probably some of the biggest problems when it comes to these events. And when you look at the history of um, rap concert shootings and stuff like that, um, for the stuff that has occurred indoors, it's either going to be because of poor security not checking people, or most likely it's going to be because it came in through the back door where the performers came in, and or event people came in and they were unchecked. So, planning to cover all exits and entrances, and then also making sure that everybody who comes in through those is getting checked, regardless of who they are. even the freaking client themselves. Talks about entrance management. So for large events where you're going to be having people patted down and having a screening process, that's where more planning can really play off. Having tables set up so that you can have people's bags set on them and gone through, having a pre-amount of identified personnel up there, not just performing the searches, but also someone just standing there making sure that no one's getting by without being searched. Because if you only get, two people at the door and they're all super busy patting people down, well, someone could walk by them as they're bent down patting someone's ankle areas and not even know that someone went by them because there's so many people up there. So having enough sufficient people up there to, one, perform the job, but then two, also oversee everything and make sure that people aren't walking by, etc. And then also having a plan in place to switch those people out who are doing the searching, because after a while it gets pretty tiring doing pat downs on people. So having a sufficient amount of people to do switch outs, stuff like that, having your table set up into the entrance area a certain way, having the bike racks or the VIP ropes set up in a way to cattle shoot people in through a certain way, so that they're all lined up on the sidewalk versus being 180 around the entrance door, from one side of the door going all around in a half circle to the other side. Like if you have people just coming in from all angles trying to get in, that makes it very chaotic and harder to manage. So having things set up to force everyone to be entering in through one side, getting into the search area, limiting the amount of people coming in from that line. So having someone there to, all right, next two people step up, and then holding everyone else. All right, next two people step up. Just someone who does that can be very helpful. Exit. So when it's time to get everybody to leave, certain things need to go into place there. If you've got a large enough event where it's indoors and there's bike racks and stuff like that set up there for crowd control, you can do things like pre-identify. All right, when this thing ends, we're going to have 5 people come over here. We're going to lift up this bike rack and we're going to shift it in a way and move it so that it cuts off this area where people can't start walking and mingling over here, and it's going to funnel everybody to this exit door over there. So little things like that. Escalator, if it's a large enough place, like a big convention center or something like that, you may need to think about turning escalators on or off. To one, if it's going to be shutting off a certain floor, you don't want people going up to that second floor or whatever. And if the escalator is the only thing there, a lot of people don't like going upstairs, so they're not going to be walking up an escalator anyway. And then when an escalator is shut off, that's a pretty common sign to most people. Hey, this thing's not working. Probably can't be going up there. Credentialing. That is one of the most important things for events is proper credentialing. Cannot stress this one enough, and this is really where a lot of pre-planning comes into play. Identifying what these things are going to be looking like, and identifying that everybody needs to be having some type of credential on them. Because you'll get the event organizer or a promoter, or you'll get someone like a DJ or whatever who they don't wear anything, right? And not everybody knows whose face what looks like. So, and that's another thing to go into with the planning too, taking pictures of some of the key people. So you may have 20 security personnel working at this event, and someone's job may be to cover an exit door or a side entrance or something like that. Well, they need to know who some of the key players are as far as this event goes. Like who is the event organizer? Who's the point of contact for food and beverage, stuff like that. Just kind of have an idea of who's who. Um, but even though you do that, those people still need to have credentials of some sort, because can't tell you how many times, a promoter or someone kind of high up in the event, because you know, they mingle with the other, key players. Everyone knows what each other looks like. They feel like they don't have to wear a lanyard around their neck. They feel like they don't have to wear a wristband or whatever. And then when they come through a side entrance door and security's there, and security stops them, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Not letting anybody in unless they're credentialed, and they stop them, and then it causes a big, or can cause a big kind of contention between them and the security personnel or whatever. Or sometimes these sponsors or these promoters, event organizers, or someone higher up, some of them have a kind of a god complex, especially like DJs and performers and stuff like that. They kind of have that like this little god complex, whatever, and they can get an attitude real quick and get a little pushy too. Want to like kind of push through security and walk past them, or kind of move them out of the way, and that can go sideways real quick. You could end up with a DJ being slammed on the ground, and then they've got to be performing or doing something, getting on the ones and twos here in a little bit, but they just got their face busted because they well, what it boiled down to is they didn't wear their credentials, and then they got an attitude, right? So credentialing is really important. Especially for like backstage stuff, when it's going to be like a large music venue or something like that, or music event, VIP stuff. And that's another thing too, like who can be in the VIP area. That has always been a big problem with some events, is you'll have a VIP area, and everyone's supposed to have a certain colored wristband or something like that on. Well, then you'll have the entity that is doing the event. You may have someone who's kind of high up in that group or whatever, or just a part of the group or whatever, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, those two girls, they can come in here." Okay, well, who are you? Like, what authority do you have to be saying that can be coming into an area without credentials on? So again, that stuff like that goes back into the pre-planning and identifying who has say over anything, who has managerial powers, who can say someone can be in an area without credentials. And your planning may have a plan for that. You may have a plan for lack of credentialing and who can authenticate someone for being in an area without a credential. Or you may have the plan in place that doesn't matter if it's the person paying everyone's salary, the person signing everyone's check. Not even they can say someone can be in an area without a wristband. Like, you can have the policy in place that everyone has to have a wristband to be in here, regardless of who you are, and there's nobody that can say otherwise. Which is a pretty good plan to follow, because once you start getting into one or two people, allowing certain things to go on and people to skip the credentialing process, then that kind of can lead to a lot of confusion. And then that kind of goes back into, one person may have been told they can come back there, and one security person was there when it happened. Well, then now security switched out. They had to go take a restroom break or something like that, and there's another security person there. They haven't been told about, who's been allowed to come in without a wristband or whatever. This person's been going in and out the whole time without a wristband, and then boom, they try to come back in, and that other person tries to stop them, and then they get an attitude, and then they get told to leave, and then that causes a big O issue. Credentialing can even go so far as to go beyond just wristbands. It can even go so far as to creating actual ID cards. So large events where things would come into play like that would be like your Super Bowl events. There's actually a special credentialing process that goes on for events like that, and they have controlled ID badges for everyone that has their photo IDs, what their title is, what their function and all that is. And they have like holographic emblems on them, so you can't easily counterfeit those things. So if you got a large enough event, that's something else that you can be thinking about for a credentialing aspect, is having specialized ID cards for certain people of these events. That way everyone can be easily identified on who they are. They've got their ID badge on them, etc. For a security standpoint, that could be important as well, because when you think about terrorism, someone could be pretending to be security to get into a certain area. So if you got someone walking around, they got a security vest on or whatever, and they try to come in through a side door, and this other security person's there, and they're like, "Oh, this guy must be with us," and they let them in. Well, if you have a credential plan in place where everyone has to have their ID badge, at least visible or present it to someone, then that could cut down on things like that occurring. Ticketing barriers, kind of already talked about that stuff. Diffusing crowd tension. So there's certain things can excite a crowd and get them more rambunctious and stuff like that, especially for a music venue and stuff that's going on. So if it's kind of a rap concert, rap music kind of thing, there's certain songs you just don't need to be playing at these things, like "Nuck If You Buck." Throw your hood up, tear the club up. Those are certain songs that should be banned at events like that, because that will turn the crowd boom like that, and it'll get them very hyped up. I know many years ago when I did bouncing, there was a bar called Good Times, and it was known, like, all DJs, which most of the time had the same DJ, but sometimes there'd be a different DJ there. But it was a unwritten rule, like, you never play "Nuck If You Buck." You play "Nuck If You Buck," there's going to be a fight. So having a plan in place, and speaking with the DJs, and having them on the same page of, you start noticing crowds being hyped up, change the music, change some of the stuff that's being played, have something a little bit more or less invigorating. Different little things could be done here and there to get people calmed down, or to prevent people from being escalated. Restricted viewing locations and video screens. Again, like, if it's in a public space, you can't really tell people that they can't be videoing a certain area. So what you have to do in those kind of scenarios is create like a barrier of sorts, so that people can't be filming into certain areas. The video screens, like having like the big TV thing up, so that people from far away from the stage can be looking at these things. That may be something to think about for crowd control. Having enough of those evenly spread out, so that you're not creating hot spots of people all trying to converge in on this one screen area, or depending on seating and stuff like that, you got a bunch of people getting mad because they can't see over so many people. And so if you have more than one TV screen or big large screen or whatever that's showing what's going on, it makes it better for the overall crowd, because they're not getting anxious because they can't see what's going on. Traffic and transportation, kind of already talked about that, but that's something that is important when it comes to large events, is your traffic control and your parking. And it may even be something as you may not need police involvement or presence during the event, but you may be reaching out to local law enforcement and be like, "Hey, we've got this large event going on. At certain time is when we're going to be letting out, and there's only one exit out onto this roadway, so it may be good for them to know, so that they can have officers down there doing traffic control on that public roadway, to get people out of the venue safely, and onto the roadway and make the traffic conditions a lot safer. Going more into the vehicle access, public transportation. Again, that's going to be for more of a large public event, downtown kind of area, stuff like that. Towing and disabled vehicles. So you may have, depending on the event, some people may pull up really close to an entrance area for the building and then park in a non-parking area, like a non-designated parking spot. You may have people who park in a handicap spot when they don't have handicap stickers or anything like that. So having a plan in place to get rid of vehicles like that. And that in and of itself can create some hostility with some people. So having a plan in place, if you're going to have to request a tow truck to come remove a vehicle, well, you should have a plan in place that you have two security go out there to monitor that situation out there, so that if people, they were to come out and start throwing a hissy fit, that a fight doesn't occur out there. Event vehicle pre-screening. So depending on the event, you may have vehicles being screened as they're coming in. So I had one event, or actually more than one event, where vehicles were coming into this private property, and vehicles had to be checked because the event organizer wanted to sell alcohol, and they didn't want people bringing alcohol in. It was a large enough property where people could park in a basically open field in a kind of large parking lot area, and then they'd have to walk down to where the event was going on. But there was no restrictions on people, going back and forth with their vehicles or anything like that. So, people could try to bring in alcohol, keep it in their car, and then go down to the event, and then come back to the car, drink, and go back. So, to alleviate that, the organizer just wanted vehicles to be searched before they came in, and so that was something that had to be done. Just checking, trunks and coolers and stuff like that, making sure no alcohol was coming in. And something like that can be, you can tell the people, all right, you can either get out of line, go back home, and put this stuff back in your fridge or leave it at home, whatever, or you can discard it here, throw it in the trash, or set it off to the side to be thrown in the trash. Under the pretext of we're not a storage unit, we're not a coat check entity, like we're not going to be able to give this back to you when you come back, like you leave it here, it's going in the trash. So that can be an opportunity to collect a bunch of alcohol. I remember after that event, we had quite a few cases of beer and some bottles of liquor that ended up getting divvied up and equally distributed out to the people who wanted them after the conclusion of the event. Which was funny because the event organizer had figured out what was going on, and then they got pissed off because they weren't in the loop on receiving free beer at that point. That was the rodeo that I did. But other events, it may be a large enough event for a potential terrorism thing. So you may have to be doing actual, checks of vehicles, opening, the hoods and running the mirrors under the vehicle, looking for signs of a VBID, vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. Parking, talked about that already. Parking is, an important thing. You got to have, people making sure that the parking is being done right, because you just can't leave people on their own to do parking, especially if it's going to be in a field and there's no designated lines or anything like that. People are going to try to pull up as close as they can. They may not even be thinking about how they need to park, and they may park in a way that prevents the vehicles, a row in front of them from being able to back out properly. So it may be something where If it's a grass field and the event organizer is paying for it and everything, they may provide the funding and the means to get spray paint, and you can mark off you know parking areas. You can get flagging tape and kind of create your rows for vehicles to park into, and then having someone out there who is directing people on how to park to make sure they're all parking in a nice, evenly manner, and they're not parking in a stupid way that's going to get people blocked in and create potential issues of vehicles hitting other vehicles when trying to leave or anything like that. Or identifying holes in the ground out in the field. One event we had, there was parking in the field area, and was able to identify just a hole in the ground, like a depression. And so properly marking that, making sure that no vehicles would pull into it and then bottom out. So parking is for large events is going to be an important thing. Um, what if there are off-site parking places? A planning thing that go into place would be how are you going to move or get a bunch of people from one area of parking over to the main venue area. So having shuttles may be something that could be planned for, whether it's an actual shuttle bus or doing the golf cart thing where you have multiple people on golf carts going back and forth, bringing people back over. Public health, again, kind of talked about water stations and stuff like that, making sure that people don't succumb easily to heat injuries or anything like that. Um, Food. So you may have events where there's going to be food vendors, food trucks, stuff like that. So having a person who's going to be in charge of being that point of contact for food and beverage, the person's going to be um, checking in food vendors, getting a list of food vendors who are going to be there. They're going to be the ones that are responsible for giving those food vendors their credentials, checking their paperwork, making sure that their um, licenses and stuff are up to date. Um, that they've paid their fee if they're going to make if you're going to make them pay a fee to be there or whatever. Um, but then also coming up with plans for disposing of the grease, disposing of the food, having their own trash cans, um, their waste management and stuff like that. Um, a large kitchen, for like a convention center. More of that planning may be on their side, but there's things to consider for that, especially if it's going to be a large event where you think that some terrorism kind of thing could be going on, or it's going to be a large dinner event for a certain group that may be controversial. You may want to put into place some um, safety and security protocols to make sure that the food preparation area is properly secured. It's monitored. That way, there's no poisoning going on. Do the do the Earl tray. So the Earl tray is all the food that's been made and prepared. You'll make up a plate or a tray of all that food, wrap it up, throw it in the fridge, and then that way, if something were to happen to people, you can go back and test that tray to see if there's any poison added to it or anything like that. So it goes into a lot about talking about food. And food is you know, that's an important thing. That's why we have, restaurant inspections and stuff like that. That's why we have things in place because people can get sick and or killed if things are not done properly with food. Water, that's going to be one of the most important things for an outdoor event is making sure that there's sufficient amount of water for people to have access to. Um, if you limit the access of water, you increase the chances of people having heat injuries, people becoming dehydrated, creating medical problems for them. Then you have to have EMS come out and get these people. It just creates a lot of issues. Toilets, again, that's another important thing, and having a sufficient amount of those. Because you start getting into the issue of not having enough toilets, then you start having, especially men, you start having people, find places to go urinate, and they will go pee on a wall, go pee on a car, whatever. And when you start having a bunch of people doing that, then you start having human waste that's out there in the open. People could be walking through it, it could be making a unpleasant smell in a certain area, too much urine, and in certain vegetation, it can be bad for that, cause that vegetation to die, whatever. Um, so having a sufficient amount of porta potties if need be, or if it's an indoor event, the planning could be in place to have someone from maintenance who's going to be there. That way, if toilets start getting clogged, stuff starts happening, there's someone there to fix that toilet. Because if you get a bathroom that has 5 toilets in it, 2 of them go down, um, and they don't get fixed, well, that decreases the amount of toilets that you have. But then, too, also, if you don't have anything in place to lock those down, you're still going to have people going in there peeing in those toilets, right? Like, I have seen people, it is usually from drunk people, but I've seen urinals that were out of service and wrapped up with a trash bag, and people still peed on the urinals, and you had like the trash bag kind of pressed down into the urinal bowl itself, and people were peeing into that. Or people just go in the corner of a room and pee in the corner, which creates safety issues because it creates slippery surface on the ground, and then that's just gross. People can be people can be pretty nasty. I'll just say that. Even breaks down a pretty cool chart here on if you've got with men. If you've got less than 500, you need 3 toilets, 8 urinals, 2 sinks, um, where alcohol is available. And then for things where there's not alcohol available, it gives you recommendations on that. So very important, especially with alcohol, because the more you drink, the more you gotta go urinate. And because drunk people do stupid stuff, if there's not enough facilities for them, they will start peeing on different things. And then you also got to think about toilets for vendors, for staff members, and especially for security, especially if they're armed security. You can't be having armed security go use the same restroom as everyone else, because of the gun belt. You got to take that gun belt off, and if it's a stall where the bottoms, where the walls don't go all the bottom is open and exposed. Someone could be reaching up under there, grab the gun belt, whatever. Um, so security definitely needs their own restroom area, a place where they can safely take their gun belt off and not have a huge risk or concern for someone reaching and grabbing that thing and taking off. Um, for people working, yeah, it's best to have a restroom for them to be able to utilize. That way they can go use the restroom and then quickly get back to their assigned area. If they're having to use the same restroom as everyone else, they're going to be waiting in line. Be waiting in line for a long time, finally use the restroom and then get back, and then they've been gone for so long that it creates issues on them. Showers, so that's going to be for really large events, multi-day, music festivals, stuff like that. That's something you need to think about and consider, from a planning standpoint, is the showers, how they're going to be maintained throughout those multiple days. Having cleaning staff go in there, etc. From a security standpoint, um, during certain times of the event. You may need to have someone going in and checking those areas to make sure that things aren't going on in there that they're not supposed to be going on. Talked about the food waste and the regular waste, animals, rodents, and vegetation. So it seems like everybody has a freaking service dog now. Everyone has an emotional support dog. And it's usually an untrained dog, an undisciplined dog, a little yappy dog that doesn't mind for crap, and you can tell it has no no real training whatsoever. But people are people, and they love their pets, and they're going to say, "Oh yeah, my dog's it's a service dog." Um, so that can be an issue for certain things, certain venues, especially you got 100 people coming in, and 100 people say, "I got a service dog," and you get 100 dogs in there. Those dogs are going to be pooping and peeing somewhere. Those dogs are probably untrained, undisciplined, and they're going to be probably barking at the other dogs and or maybe trying to fight the other dogs too. So you have to come up with a plan on how you're going to deal with that. And that goes back into way earlier talking about knowing the laws, knowing what you can and cannot ask people about service animals and stuff like that. Um, Wild animals. So outdoor venue or something like that, you may need to have a plan in place on how you're going to deal with, snakes. You may be in certain areas where it's closer to woods, more rural kind of place, and so you may have a more increased risk of something like rattlesnakes showing up, and so you got to have a plan on how to deal with snakes like that. Or the venue or the event could be involving animals themselves. It could be a circus and or an event that has, you know, predatory animals like bears and big cats. And you need to have a plan in place on what happens if those damn things escape their enclosure. Um, the rodeo that I did, I had a plan in place in the event that a bull got loose and got into the crowd spectator area. Um, and then you got to think about those things and those people who are bringing these animals, talking to them, getting with them, identifying whether or not they have tranquilizers, how quickly those tranquilizers work. They may say, "Yeah, we got a tranquilizer," but it takes 15 minutes to take effect. Well, within that 15 minutes, a freaking bull can be screwing up a lot of people, and um, if their horns are unpadded and uncovered, they'll be um, puncturing people and or trampling them to death. So, if they don't have anything in place to immediately be able to control that bull, bring it under control, you may have to have a plan in place to euthanize that bull or that cat or that bear very quickly with firearms. Um, and again, vegetation for the rural areas. You may have poison ivy, stuff like that out there that you would have to have a plan in place. Swimming and water safety. So like hotels and stuff like that. You may run into an issue where there's pools and stuff like that, or it may be an actual event that is catered around a pool or something like that. Um, it could be something at like a marina or something, or some type of event is going on. So having plans in place on are there going to be lifeguards there? Are there going to be throw bags, throw devices, life preserver things, security personnel? If they're going to be around the water, like working marina, um, or whatever, or being at the water's edge, they should realistically have some type of protection in place, like a personal flotation device. That way, if they end up in the water and go unconscious, they're not going to drown. Um, Not a whole lot of things involving pools that I've dealt with. and overall, there's not a whole lot of things that involve the water and stuff like that for most events, but you can have larger events that involve swimming and need the water safety. Spring break coming up, so places down at the southern coast area, um, there's going to be events going on at places that have pools and or involving the beach and the water and stuff like that. So places like that are going to have to think about the planning and consideration for water safety. The tattooing and body piercing, so I mean that would be like at large festivals and stuff like that. And that can go back into uh, having a person that's going to be in charge of being a point of contact for entities like this, making sure they've got their proper licenses in place, and that they got, you know, they're going to have sharps containers and all this stuff to make sure that you know dirty needles just aren't going to be laying around or anything like that. Medical care. This is another important thing to be thinking about for large events. Having first aid equipment and first aid trained people on site. Um, for even small little injuries, someone, some glass was on the ground and they were wearing sandals and, their foot got cut or they fell down, got cut, whatever. You need to have basic first aid stuff for that. And then also, if people get some serious physical injuries, you need to have trauma kits for that to be able to help provide medical care for those people. Having properly trained people on site. So, um, one of the rodeo events that I've done, um, I've for the client, secured EMTs for these events because you have a pretty increased risk of injuries occurring at a rodeo, right? Um, so you need to be thinking about medical personnel in that sense, reaching out to the ambulance provider, seeing if they can provide a BLS truck, basic life support truck, to be there on site for the duration of the event. Um, Identifying casualty collection points and having everybody educated on where those are going to be at. Um, Not just security, but also like food vendors and other people working the event. Like, hey, if someone's hurt and they can walk, it's nothing serious. Take them to this area over here because this will be the easiest way for EMS to get to them. And then also having a plan in place if someone is not ambulatory, like they cannot move, they're unconscious, there's a suspected spinal injury, whatever. Having that plan in place on what to do in that event. Security comes in, creates a protective ring around the downed person. If they can kind of be moved, kind of move them away to a better area. But suspected spinal injury, stuff like that, you don't want to be moving anybody. So, setting up that protective ring around them, and then when EMS gets there, providing that protective ring around them, and then also keeping people back who have good intentions, but obviously don't need to be doing anything. I cannot tell you how many times I've worked events. Someone got hurt, and then some drunk ass person came up. I'm a nurse. Okay, that's great, but you're a drunk nurse. Step the fuck back. um, and then keeping the live streamers back. Everyone wants to get all close with their phones and videotape what's going on. Pushing these people back, keeping them back. One, for the dignity of the person who's hurt, but then two, just to give a good workspace. Keeping all these non-essential people back, getting them out of the way. Um, like I said, identifying casualty collection points, where to bring injured people, and then also identifying where the medical equipment's going to be at. You know, at these casualty collection points, are there going to be first aid kits? Where is the main trauma bag going to be at? And identifying to everyone, hey, this is where it's at. And then where it's going to be at, making sure that it's easily grabbable. There's nothing sitting on top of it. It's not piled under a bunch of crap. It's out there, sitting right there on top in the open, and anyone can come up, grab it, and take it to where it needs to be. Identifying how ambulances are going to come into the venue. Is there a back entrance that they can come in so they don't have to fight through the crowd in the front? Um, are they aware of where these casualty collection points are going to be? Did you reach out to the ambulance provider and provide them a briefing sheet saying, hey, in the event of a medical emergency and you have to come out here, this is where we're going to put people at. If you come out here, here's a road that comes into the back of the property that you can take and then park back here. You ain't got to deal with a whole bunch of crowd, a whole bunch of vehicles. You get in there a lot quicker, etc. Same with the fire trucks. Planning information. One, you're collecting all this information, you're making a plan on what needs to be going on, and then disseminating that information out to people that need to have it. Um, Again, going back into a briefing sheet, having your EMS providers for that area informed on one, the event that's going on, and then two, where stuff's going to be at, and also with the fire department as well. Um, just because they're a fire department doesn't mean that all they do is just fire stuff, right? A lot of fire departments to maintain their funding because fires have gone down over the years, to maintain their funding and keep that revenue coming in, so to speak, or keep that budget coming in, and to do something. A lot of them do medical runs. You have some fire departments where all the firefighters are EMTs, basically, or at least a medical responder level of training, something higher than just basic CPR, AED, first aid. And so you'll be having fire trucks coming to a medical call. So the fire department needs to be educated or informed on, where injured people are going to be brought to, what's the best way to get into this place, etc. Identifying, hospitals in the area. That way, if for whatever reason, you need to be directing people, if it's just something minor and they want to go to the hospital and they don't want an ambulance, you can at least provide information to them on where the hospital is going to be at. Um, for your own team, you may have a plan in place. If one of your own is injured in a critical incident, you may have someone take them directly to the hospital themselves. Um, Performers, stuff like that, may have a plan in place that instead of waiting for the ambulance, you're just going to take them directly to the hospital. So knowing where the hospital's at, etc., would obviously be important to know. Um, but there are times for very large events that you could kind of have um, like a little bit of a miniature emergency room kind of thing on site, like a little hospital thing where you have someone with higher levels of training and multiple um, um, multiple medically trained people working in one little area. Something like the Super Bowl, large things like that would be something where you see something like this come into play. Weather. So when it comes to planning for your event, you need to know about the weather. You need to know uh, what the weather is going to be doing um, right now, and what the predicted weather is going to be like over the course of the event. Whether it's going late into the evening or it's going over multiple days, and disseminating that information out to people as well, especially if it's going to be an outdoor event. Weather is something that you really need to keep on top of for outdoor events, especially if there's going to be storms and stuff moving in, because you don't want large amounts of people out in the open when lightning strikes are going to be occurring. And again, that goes back into um, having certain shelters and everything for people to be able to go into in the event of severe weather. Talked about aircraft, but if your event's going to have aircraft there, you need to have some kind of plan in place in the event that something were to happen. Camping, so that is something that occurs for outdoor events like music festivals and stuff like that. You'll have on-site camping. That in of itself needs to have its own planning in place to make sure that there's proper waste disposal going on, marking of streets, like how to identify if there's like multiple rows here in this campground area. How does everyone know which row to go down? If you say on the radio, "Hey, come down the third row," well, how do they know exactly what third row you're talking about? Third row from this gate entrance over here, or third row from this gate entrance over here? Um, so some simple planning would be at the beginning of all these different rows, take spray paint and write on the ground 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. Going to if it's like camping, or not camping, if it's like RV, camper, kind of spots or whatever, it could be something as simple as going down each of those lots and writing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way through 20. That way you can say, all right, come to row 6, lot 20. And you just follow the markings on the ground and you can get to exactly where you need to go. Fires is something else to be thinking about, especially if there's going to be tents and stuff like that. And especially if there's going to be alcohol involved, because you're going to have drunk people, lighting fires and, having their grills and stuff going on. So there's a lot of concerns for fire in the campground. Having proper fire safety stuff in place, like fire extinguishers. You make sure you have enough fire extinguishers spread throughout the area or available to the area, so that in the event that there is a fire, you can put that out pretty quickly. How to communicate to the campers very quickly, like installing PA speakers, or if it's a campground area that already has those installed, how to be able to access that, who's the person who knows how to operate that stuff in the event of something like a tornado coming through or something occurring. You can get on that PA system and alert all the campers in that area of what's going on, what they need to be doing, etc. If it's going to be alcohol and stuff involved, and there's little campfires and stuff going on, for a safety and security standpoint, you may have to have a person that's on fire watch essentially during sleeping hours. Have a security person who's going to be making some rounds through the campgrounds, checking on things, making sure no fires are getting out of control, and just making sure that someone's camper doesn't catch on fire while they're asleep. So having someone on fire watch, and then also for the alcohol standpoint, people be hanging out in the campground, staying up late, getting drunk. That increases risks and chances of fights occurring and stuff like that, and or assaults or sexual assaults. So having a security presence in a campground for certain things, certain events, may be important. The location of where this campground is going to be. You certainly don't want to put a campground area in a low-lying area that's subject to flooding when there's potential flash flood in the horizon with the weather report. Places that are easy accessible, places that makes it easy for you to control the flow, control entry into that area, to make sure that people aren't getting into that area without paying, unless there is a pay to get in or whatnot. So making sure people aren't getting in for free, and then also maybe for the entry point of there, depending on the vendor, if they or the event sponsor, if they want vehicles being checked, that could be another whole thing. That could be a time consuming process, is doing vehicle checks, making sure people aren't bringing in outside alcohol, stuff like that. When you start getting into campers and things like that, that is going to significantly increase manpower to do adequate searches for that. Hazardous materials. So there may be certain things on site that is a hazardous material, or could be a danger, um, like um, pressurized gas cylinders. Like for children's balloons, stuff like that, cooking fuel, whatever. Those are things that plans need to be in place for, to make sure that things are being done properly, and you don't have a freaking cylinder fall over and crack that nozzle on it, and that thing takes off like a torpedo. Going into sea burn, again, that's going to be something that is for large events where you have an increased likelihood of terrorism. And when it gets to that kind of level, you're definitely going to be having more government involvement with that. Like going back to the Super Bowl, like they have a big plan for that. They have a team that's basically on standby in the event of some type of sea burn attack. Explosives would be a more likely thing versus nuclear and radiological, biological. Not to say that those are impossible, but the most likely thing out of those things would be explosive attacks. And excuse me, with explosive attacks, you can have vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. So being able to have people properly trained and educated on how to identify vehicles that could be VBIDs. Is the vehicle sagging a lot? Indicating that there's a lot of weight in that vehicle, a lot of explosive stuff, certain smells, things like that. Identifying, certain size vehicles, how much explosives they could be holding, and what your safe distance in a radius is from that vehicle if it were to be filled with explosives, and knowing how far to get people back. Having a bomb threat plan in place. What if someone calls in a bomb threat? What is the plan going to be? What protocols are going to be followed, etc. Kind of already talked about fire safety. Communications. This is going to be a real important one, especially if it's a very large event. Um, what communication systems are you using? Are you using the family radio system, the FRS radios? If so, what channel is everyone going to be on? What code channel is everyone going to be on? What are people's designators, etc. Going into your primary means of communication, your secondary means of communication, um, your alternative and emergency communications as well. Um, Security needs to have their own radio channel, um, and not everyone at the venue needs to have access to that security channel. Um, it's not recommended that security use FRS frequencies or use the FRS radios, because anybody can tap into those frequencies and get on them. It's best if you have licensed radios through FCC and you have your own frequency, and it's a lot harder for people to get onto those frequencies and interfere with your communications. Um, but definitely, security needs to be on their own channel, because you don't want security getting annoyed with all this other radio traffic that's going on. I need ice over here at the pizza stand, or hey, we need more tickets over here, or we need this, we need trash taken out over here by this, blah blah. Like, people will get annoyed by that because it has nothing to pertain to them, right? And what they'll end up doing is they'll end up turning the radio down because they're getting tired of hearing all that stupid radio traffic. Um, the waste disposal people, the food vendors, are you going to have multiple channels in place for people to be operating off of? And depending on the size of the event, you may need to have something like 5 channels designated to be operating off of, or you can have, at minimum 2 channels to be operating off of. Um, the duration of the event, is it going to be uh, more than one day? Do you have enough batteries and charging stuff in place to be able to keep all these radios running for 2 days straight? Do you have enough radios? Talked about public address system, an emergency warning system for the event. That can go into, if it's a music event and you got the band and everything, utilizing either the sound technician to be able to um, override the performers and have a message relayed, or the performers having them in on the plan to be able to deliver a message to people if need be. Um, it's probably better for the sound control technician to be able to, from the soundboard, turn off the mics from the band. That way all the music stopped, and then the soundboard person can be delivering that message out, or be giving the microphone to a security person or someone in charge to be able to relay information out to the large crowd of people to evacuate. Got a missing kid, this is what he looks like, etc. Rumor control. That's going to be something for very, really, really large events that could be, multiple days, like a big music festival or something like that. Um, it could be even a shorter duration too. Um, rumors. So several years back, did the Harley drags at Beach Bend, and it seemed like every year there was some rumor about some 1% motorcycle club that's going to be coming in the town, and they had beef with this other group, and they could be fighting, or I remember there was like one rumor that yeah, they got orders to shoot on sight, if they see such and such. It's like every year there was something, like the Hell's Angels are coming, and they're beefing with this group, and blah blah blah. They said that there was a fight that occurred in this state, and they're going to shoot each other, blah blah. It was every freaking year. And one thing I've learned about, or one thing I learned at the Harley drags, is the MCs are probably some of the most antisocial people ever. There was one big group of them that were out there, the Outlaws, and they would go to a certain part of the park and put up caution tape and everything, and kind of like make their own little secluded area, their own like campground within a campground, sort of. And they would stay there. Like, they wouldn't really come out a whole lot. They would just kind of stay in their own little area. They had their own big fire pit back there, probably cooking a pig or something. But they would kind of like just stay with themselves. And it was funny because like the larger MC groups were probably the most, I guess, well behaved of them all, and probably the most antisocial ones. It was the little small motorcycle groups, the little short man syndrome kind of dudes who wanted something to prove. They were the ones, the local groups. They were probably the most problematic ones. Um, but anyway, rumor control. So being on top of the rumors and everything and squashing stuff, because you may have people coming up. You'll be like, oh my God, I heard that you know, this group's coming and blah, 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 blah. They're gonna kill everybody. Like, no, that's a rumor. That's not happening. It's cool. Get back on your golf cart. Alcohol, drugs, and weapons. Right. So alcohol. Kind of already talked about this with credentials. Having a credentialing process in place to identify people who are allowed to be consuming alcohol. Controlling those wristbands. That's probably one of the most important things is controlling those wristbands, making sure that not too many hands get a hold of them. Because you get 5 people, you divvy up wristbands, between 5 to 10 different people. That increases the chances of stuff leaving control and then being handed out. If you limit the control of the wristbands to a couple people at a certain spot, and those are the only 2 people that have access to those bands, then you decrease those chances of wristbands walking around and getting on the people they don't need to be getting on. I have a personal rule, personal policy that the vendor or the event organizer will never provide to me wristbands. I provide my own wristbands. That's its own thing. They get billed for it. Because if I'm going to be taking on that liability of checking IDs and stuff, then I call the shots on that. I provide the wristbands. They're unique. They can't be easily counterfeited, and I maintain control of them. Like, I don't have this one person go out and buy the wristbands. They give me a bunch of them, but then they keep a bunch for themselves so they can hand out to their underage friends. Like, I don't I don't play that game. If I don't provide the wristbands, then I don't check IDs. As simple as that. Drugs. So, depending on the type of event, you may have at your entry control the need to pat people down to stop drugs from coming in. And this is mostly going to be at concerts and stuff like that, because you'll have people who want to do drugs at these kind of events. And that is where actual pat downs are more useful than just running people through metal detectors, because a metal detector is not going to detect a bag of cocaine. It's not going to detect a bag of fentanyl, right? It's not going to detect those things. So pat downs, I think, are the best way to go about stuff. And depending on the event going on, pat downs should be done, especially for like rap stuff and music concerts. They need to be done. Weapons, most private venues are not going to be allowing weapons or anything like that. When you start getting into public spaces, you've blocked a street, you've blocked this streets in the downtown district area, whatever. That's still public space. That's still a public roadway. That's still a public sidewalk. People can be carrying weapons on them, right? This is America. So when it comes to stuff like that, you're going to be limited on what you can tell people if you spot a weapon or not. When it comes to a private venue can always dictate whether or not they're going to allow certain weapons in or no weapons at all. And it's not just controlling those things from coming into the building or into the venue place itself. It's also maintaining awareness and having a plan in place if those things were to be brought out into the parking lot area. So when it comes to like music concerts and stuff like that, part of the security plan is to have security go out into the parking lot area and make a sufficient show of presence. That way, that decreases the chances of people starting to bring guns out, because the more they see uniformed people out there, the less likely they're to pull guns out and do stupid stuff. And then the alcohol and drug stuff for the outside of the venue, that's where, you have security out in the parking lot area, making sure that people are not consuming excess amounts of alcohol, over serving themselves, and make sure they're not doing drugs out in the parking lot before they go in. Or they've gone in, they come back out, get more liquored up, and then go back in. because that can cause a lot of issues on the inside. Because you can go outside, chug you a couple of bottles, or down, whatever, and the time it takes you to walk back to the front entrance and go inside, you're not showing any signs that you're overserved. But once you're inside, that stuff starts taking effect, and then that's where the problems start occurring. Um, and then it's not mentioned in here, but tobacco. So a lot of large urban areas are pretty much tobacco free anywhere, um, and that can be an issue at some places. Is people lighting up a cigarette inside at a venue, and you got to put a stop to that because the venue, they could get a fine if they were caught allowing people to be smoking tobacco inside the building or whatever. I've done events before at a big, large public place where people, they had a pack of cigarettes on them. They had to be told to go put it in their car, or they could throw it away in the trash can right there. Um, Drugs. Um, I don't think it's a wise idea to let people take the drugs back with them. That's stuff they're not supposed to be having. And then two, um, they could say they're taking it back to their car, but really they could be consuming it by the time they get back to their car. Um, so when it comes to drugs, once those are found, I don't think they should ever be given back to the people. They should be thrown in the trash or thrown into some type of secured receptacle that they can't easily get a hold of it. And then depending on what it is, law enforcement involvement. So when it comes to marijuana, there's been a lot of events and stuff where you find marijuana on people. I just pour it out on the ground and then take my boot and rub it back and forth in the ground. That way they're not getting it back. And I mean, if they're really, really, really dedicated on wanting to get it back, I guess they could get on their hands and knees and try to scoop some of it up. But that's obviously not going to be happening because they're going to be told to leave. When it comes to heavier stuff, find like pills or meth, stuff like that. That's when law enforcement should realistically be notified so that they can come collect that stuff and then deal with the people there. Unfortunately, it is hit or miss on what law enforcement will do with those people. On multiple occasions at different events, we have found hard stuff, hard drugs on people. Found meth on someone, and found cocaine on another person, and local police get called and they come out there, and their response will be something like, well, we didn't see it on them, so we can't really do anything about it. I actually had one time, the guy had meth on him. He had it folded up in an old $5 bill, and local police came out to the call, and they were like, well, we didn't witness it being on them, and for all we know, security could have put it in their pocket. It's just like, what? What kind of drugs are you on? Like, why the hell would security be planting drugs on people? Like, that's stupid. Um, but definitely, hard drugs, they need to be turned over to police. Marijuana, like, you don't. I mean, yeah, you could, have the policy in place to hand over the marijuana to local police, but they're going to get annoyed really quick when you keep calling them like 20 times in a row to come get a joint or a bag of weed that you took off someone. Um, yes, are you technically committing a crime when you take a bag of marijuana and you pour it out on the ground and squish it with your boot? Yeah, that's tampering with physical evidence. But at the end of the day, I think that most local law enforcement would be appreciative of the fact that you didn't bother them for weed. Like, they don't want to be coming out, 20 times in a row to collect a bag of marijuana. Um, so when it comes to weapons and stuff like that, obviously that's going to be a little bit different because people are able to, legally possess well, most people are able to legally possess weapons. There's some people who can't. But if you're just private security, there's really no way for you to determine or find out whether or not those people are able to legally possess it. And even if you find out they're not able to legally possess it, there's really not much you can do about that. Um, so when it comes to certain things and people having weapons, most of the time it's going to be pocket knives and stuff like that. Having a plan in place, just basically tell those people to go back to the car. Sorry you lost your place in line, but take your knife back to your car, secure it. Um, a lot of people have asked about leaving their knife with security and then coming back to get it. I don't think that that's a good option. You can tell them that it'll be in this trash can if you want to come back and look through it, but there's no guarantee that it'll be there when you come back. When it comes to guns and stuff like that, obviously, people are probably not going to be receptive of leaving their gun in the trash, right? So they're going to be wanting to take that back to their vehicle. Um, Depending on the circumstances, what they're looking like, the event venue that's going on, it may be something where you not just tell them to take their weapon back to their vehicle, but you just tell them to leave completely. Like, you don't want any weapons on the property whatsoever. And that would be more so for like a rap concert or something like that, where they come to the door and they got the gun on them, and then you tell them you're just going to have to leave the property completely. Like, you're not even going to have the option of keeping it in your car, because when that event is over, you don't want them going back to the car and having access to that gun and then a shooting occurring in the parking lot. So that's a consideration. Um, Having signage is an important thing. So identifying signage before the event occurs, having signs up saying no, drugs, weapons, stuff like that. Having signs indicating to people that searches are going to be done and that there will be no admittance to the event if a person refuses a search, etc. So they talk about security in this. They go over private uniformed security guards, uniformed police officers, talk about their roles and responsibilities, deployment. All right, so go back into the beginning of this. So depending on the event that's going on, you may have a multitude of different types of security. You may have uniform security where they're walking around in a typical uniform or security uniform, little badge, patches, stuff like that. You may have non-uniform security personnel, people wearing plain clothes. And with your uniform security personnel, you may have armed security, you may have unarmed security. You may, depending on the event, there could be uniformed police officers who are there. And either those uniformed police officers are there from the municipality, they're on overtime with their agency and they're just there, or they could be actual officers who are completely off duty, not being paid by their agency, but they're allowed to be wearing their uniform and working private security in that way. So lots of different ways for or how security could be implemented at an event. Um, Talks about roles and responsibilities, pre-event briefing of security personnel. So that's probably one of the important things to take away on this is having a briefing for all security personnel. This would go back into having your operations order done with maps of the area, overheads of the area, showing designated areas and stuff like that, and then disseminating that out to the security personnel so everybody knows what the key positions are, locations and stuff, the plans in the event of your active shooter plan, your missing child plan, your severe weather plan, etc. Have all that in the planning and have it disseminated to everybody before the event occurs. And then when the event occurs, having the people show up early enough to have a real quick briefing, go over the highlights of all that stuff that was sent out in the pre-event briefing, get people assigned to their locations, etc. And that's something that you'll have to factor in with scheduling with the client. So some clients will only want security to show up right at start time. That's unrealistic. That's not advisable. Security needs to be in place, half an hour to an hour before the event starts. And some clients have a problem with that. They don't want to pay security to be there when there's nothing going on. But you need to have security personnel in place before that event starts. You just can't have security showing up exactly at start time because they're not in their entry points. They're not controlling stuff. And there's no way to have a briefing if they show up at the same time that everyone else is showing up. So dignitaries coming to and celebrities coming to events, that's something to plan for. And depending on who it is, they may have their own security team coming in with them as well. So that's where your pre-planning comes into play. Talking with that security team, going over what their plans are, where they can park their vehicles at, where they can enter in at. If something happens, this is where they're going. Make it known to your team that no one needs to be going towards them because they're not going to know who's who. This goes back into the credentialing stuff. How are people going to be identified, etc. Lost child and meet me locations. Kind of already talked about that. Information center, planning for Murphy's Law. Anything that can happen will happen, right? Need to be planning for as much as you can. So I talked earlier about incident command and control. Showed you the list of stuff on where you can get that information and training at. But this is a good system to utilize when you are having large events go on. What is your command structure going to look like? It's going to be a unified command, right? The event organizer, the sponsor, whatever. They're of course going to be a part of that overall command, but also someone from the security side of the house needs to be in part of that command. Realistically, security, or at least a representative of security, the security manager needs to be a part of that joint command. Because when it comes down to the safety and security standpoint, security needs to have a pretty broad range of command and control and not take orders from a whole bunch of different people. And in fact, when it comes to security, they don't need to be taking orders from anybody except for the security manager. You don't need a DJ coming up telling security where they need to stand at. You don't need a band member coming up telling security where they need to stand at. You don't need a food vendor coming up telling security where they need to be. You don't need a ticket person telling security what they need to do, etc. Right? Like, the only people who need to be telling security what to do is the security manager, and that security manager needs to be a part of that unified command structure, and that needs to be communicated to everyone else too. Especially when it comes to like DJs and stuff like that. I don't know what it is with DJs and band members. It's like this little god complex they have. They all think their ideas are the greatest, and that what they say is gold, and that you need to jump to what they say. And they have their expertise is working the ones and twos and working the microphone and stuff, right? Like they don't know anything about security. Like, why are you having any say in security whatsoever? Like, stay in your lane. The planning and operations stuff. So, like I said earlier, depending on the complexity of the event, you may have a person who realistically will do planning and operations. They'll do the planning side of everything, and then when it comes to event time, boom, now they're operations of stuff. And then if it's a large enough event, you may have one person at the head of operations, and then under them, there's different things going on under those operations. Logistics, finance, administration, those positions could also be filled in a large enough event. When it involves governmental entities, it's a partnership between private and government. Part of that unified command will involve parts of the local government there in some form or fashion. And then they also may be involved in planning and operations and stuff like that. It's kind of a breakdown of incident command system. So you got your incident commander, and you can have a joint incident command. You can have two people in this role, or you can have an incident commander and a deputy incident commander. And then up here at the top, safety, information, and liaison. So safety, that would be what I'd say security and safety and security. They would be at the very top. Either part of the joint command here or right under the incident commander, and no one else can tell safety and security on what they need to be doing. But from an operations standpoint, security is something that would realistically be its own little operation. Having strike team, a division or group or whatever. But as far as the command and control of them, like I said, that security manager needs to be at the very top, and they should be the only ones that have any say on what they do. But your planning section, all these different little positions right in here. Go back to operations. So you have, depending on the complexity of the event, you may have two different divisions of stuff going on, three different divisions of stuff going on. And then under that, you may have teams of security roving around. You may have teams of this, whatever. And then you may have single resources, like one person, whatever. Logistics, that would fall under. So your points of contact for food vendors and for performers and stuff like that. That's where they would be falling under. A big enough event, you may have someone that's going to be completely in charge of finances or a process involved where finance stuff gets funneled through in a certain way. This kind of just goes over incident commander, safety officer, information officer, liaison, planning section, logistics section, finance. So that kind of gives a more breakdown of those positions. Highly recommend reading that on your own. I'm not going to read verbatim everything. Transfer of command. This would be something like when emergencies occur. So obviously when emergencies occur, the fire department gets there, they may establish command or whatever. Police, something big happens, police get there, they're going to be establishing command and be taking command of that overall scene. The duration of the event may be multiple days, and you may have more than one person who will serve in the role of incident commander for this event. During the day, it may be Bob who's in charge, and then at night, it may be Kevin who's in charge. And so that needs to be identified to people that, these certain time frames or these days, this is who is going to be in charge of this event, this is their contact information, etc. Talked about unified command, operations, talk about multi-agency coordination, emergency operations center. So also depending on the complexity of the event, you may have to implement an actual EOC, like an actual little command center, to run the whole show, right? So going back to the Lakewood church incident that I did the video on, that's a large enough facility that I highly suspect they probably have a command room or a control room with, probably camera feeds in there, but also where, from the security standpoint, everything is being ran and oversighted from that one particular room. For other large events, where the overhead team can meet, there may be a designated place where people from, different operations and planning and logistics and stuff, as far as supervisors and leaders, will come together for, a daily briefing or to meet on matters and then break apart and go their own separate ways. But someone could always be in that area as that, you know, working a radio in between the different entities, being that point of contact for, you know, phone calls, etc. Public information, kind of already talked about some of that. Your information flow. So, you know, you could have more than just, you know, a person being the go-to person to talk to media, but you could also have things in place on how to push information out through social media, through email, etc. So if you have like a large music venue and, you know, people, you know, bought tickets or whatever, um, their email may be on a list, and you could send out a mass email to everyone. They may have, you know, used their phone. You could push out information through their phones. Get, you know, the event could be advertised on social media like Facebook, and you could be pushing stuff out through the event page. There could be a group that's just dedicated for it and push out information that way. More talking about medium logistics, public safety roles. So again, for large enough events, you're probably going to have some type of police presence, um, or involvement in the overall thing. And so, what are their roles going to be in this unified command in the event? You know, there's an incident within an incident or something like that. Federal and state resources. Again, this is only going to be for like really, really, really large events, and then going. You know, I keep going back to the Super Bowl. So the Super Bowl has federal and state resources being involved. FBI is involved in it. The different federal entities are involved, with, you know, the security aspect. You know, doing bomb checks. You know, having the dogs going through sniffing stuff. Uh, Air assets. You know, could be having border patrol helicopter flying around with people in it. Federal special response team. There could be the state SWAT team there for big events, etc. So this kind of goes into contingency planning for special events. Talk about powerboat races and similar aquatic events. Haven't been involved in any of those, but again, I kind of talked about, you know, if there's an event at like a marina and stuff like that, you're gonna have to take in water safety in the consideration. Um, you know, if you got staff that's working in and around water, they need to be properly donned with PFDs in the event that they go unconscious and fall in the water. Automobile and races. So it talks about that. You know, different types of things that would fall under that, and some considerations for that. Pit areas, air shows and displays. Yeah, so there's a there's a lot that can go into the planning for an event like that. Fireworks and pyrotechnics. You know, that's another unique thing as well, and especially, you know, certain time of the year, Fourth of July, um, stuff like that. You need to think about and consider terrorist attack. And you know, one thing I don't really hear a whole lot of people talk about, and they may be thinking it, they just don't, you know, talk about it out loud. But one thing to think about with a terrorist attack on Fourth of July, there's already going to be a lot of loud noise and explosions, right? Like, someone starts popping off with guns on the 4th of July and starts setting off bombs, you're probably not going to know about it until a bomb goes off near you, or you start taking incoming rounds. So, because the whole area, you know, 4th of July is going to be lit up, you know, with fireworks going off. And when it comes to mass gatherings for a fireworks show, that's something to think about. Is like if someone starts shooting, you're not really going to know until you see a bunch of people running and screaming. And the fireworks show, there could need to be a plan in place that you need to have a direct line of communication to whoever's setting that stuff off, and so that if you give them the signal to stop, like in the show right now, they're not going to fire any more stuff off, and most likely they're going to be firing stuff off with e-matches or electronics. Very rarely will they hand like that stuff at big events. So you can very easily establish contact and say stop it, and then they can stop the program on the computer and cease all firings. That way, if people are shooting, you're going to be able to hear where that gunfire is coming from and go address it. But even the launch site stuff. So that's something else that needs to be taken into consideration for the planning and everything. Is it going to be too close to spectators? Is it going to be in an area where a bunch of people can get near it? The control of that area, because if something something goes awry, and you got a lot of boom boom going off at once, and people are too close to it, people can get seriously injured or killed. Laser displays, spontaneous events, preteen and early teen audiences. So yeah, and that can be a more difficult crowd to deal with because they are conditioned with the mindset of I can do whatever I want and no one's going to do anything to me, because when they spend the majority of their time in school, there's no consequences. Like no one snatches them up and paddles them. No one snatches them. No one touches them. Right? They can act as out of control as they want, and then for the most part, they get rewarded for it indirectly, and they don't really learn any real consequences. So dealing with a bunch of teens can be a headache, because they can just be so unruly and so used to no one touching them and doing anything to them. So they kind of, like, in a sense, have their own little god complex going on as well. Post-event actions. So demobilization. So demobilization can actually be a large part of the event itself. Maybe not so much for security in the long run, but also for the breakdown of stuff. Maybe maintaining security over vendor stuff at the conclusion of the event. So you may have the event going on during the day, then it's over with at night, but the vendors still have to keep stuff there, and they're going to keep stuff there overnight until the next day, and then they'll start their demobilization. So you may have to have security stay overnight to maintain security over the vendor stuff. As the event is letting out, is the events, just because the end time for the event is 9 o'clock, that doesn't mean security leaves at 9 o'clock. Unfortunately, there are some places that would do that. But security needs to stay long enough for all the people to be gone, because once that event is over, the thing that is keeping them distracted and glued to one thing is now gone. Now they are out and about with each other. Nothing is gaining their attention and keeping their attention, and now their minds start to wander, and they bump into people, and fights break out, etc. So in the parking lot stuff, people trying to pull out and leave, and fender benders and stuff like that. So the demobilization process means still traffic control going on, parking control going on, security presence as it's going on or leaving, and then after all the guests are gone, again, that demobilization process could mean security staying overnight to maintain security over stuff. And then also just the vendors themselves, the breakdown of stuff, that property manager may want someone there to oversee that stuff. There may be some access control issues with a large place. Gaining access to the different places where they don't need to be, and so you could have to have people there to make sure that the sound crew people who are breaking down the stages and stuff like that aren't going into certain places of a convention center that they don't need to be going into, or something. Post event analysis and after action reports. So that is a really important thing to do. Is you collect information and data during the event, and then at the conclusion of the event, you talk to people and ask for their input. The plan that we had in place. What do you think about it? Did it work well? And then there's going to be some things in that plan that just don't ever occur, so you don't know if it would have worked or not. Like an active shooter plan, you can't really do a proper AAR on an active shooter plan when there's no active shooter that occurs. So, stuff like that, you'd have to talk about it. Like, what do you think about this plan? After seeing the layout of everything and the flow of stuff, do you think that this plan would have been good, or should we do something else? And the same with other stuff too, like the severe weather plan and stuff like that. Mostly what you're going to be able to get really good input on as far as changing stuff will be the things like your access control, the entry points, how that was set up, how many people were needed, the credentials, the little issues that just comes up during an event and stuff like that. Stuff like that you'll be able to easily review and come up with better plans for the next time. But you won't know that unless you talk to people and get their input on stuff. And that is, like I said, that's probably one of the most important things to do is to get the input from people and see if what you was doing was good, and if not, how can you make it better. So in this document, they got a little pre-event planning matrix that you can go through here. Got a checklist that you can go through here. And the checklist, what type of event it is, the marketing stuff that's going on, public access, the location of it, food services, health and safety stuff, medical plan, transportation plan, parking plan, traffic patterns, and it goes over all kinds of stuff. Basically, this whole document that we've been talking about is on this little checklist that you could, make notes on, check it off, that you've got it on there. Promoter sponsor checklist, information about who this person is and everything, what their contact information is. And this information here is not just important for you to know, but it could also be important for emergency services to know. So you can get a briefing sheet done that you send to local law enforcement, fire, and EMS, that shows the map of the area that you're at, where you're going to have security at, where your casualty collection points are at, and then you have this contact information here, and then the breakdown of the information of what's going to be there at the event. Like we're going to probably have a crowd that's going to be of this, and this is the event, etc. That way, if the emergency responders have to come, they already know ahead of time what to expect and what to prepare for. So it's a good little checklist right here. Just goes over the main stuff, because there's a lot of stuff that you could overlook when planning for a large event. checklist for food vendors. And again, someone who's going to be in charge of all the food vendors. This could be a checklist for them to be able to go through and then be able to supply that up the chain. So it has quite a bit of checklists in here for all the different stuff. Fire services, fire safety. This is going to be an important checklist. Exit doors, avenues of egress, exit route markings, notification system, fire protection, or automated fire protection and manual fire protection. That's going to be an important one to have. The law enforcement venue assessment. You may be looking at all this and thinking, man, it's a lot of paperwork stuff to go through. Not everything has to be filled out, but some of the stuff is just really good stuff to have. Like a lost child information sheet, like having one of these printed out so that you can start writing stuff on and then snap a picture and send it to everybody. Um, so this is going in the briefing of the incident. Um, a sketch or mapping of the area. Hand drawn sketches, I'm not a big fan of, but having like actual aerial photos, especially if it's an outdoor event, um, even if it's an indoor event, aerial photos, from like Google Maps or whatever, can still be useful for talking about um, designated parking areas, getting everyone on the same page about orientation. This is the south side of the building, north side, whatever. Um, that can be very useful. If you can get a blueprint of that building, um, that's great, so that you can mark places on that blueprint map to show to people, where positions are going to be. And you could that could be something like a fire safety map for a building. You can take that, scan it, it shows you the hallways and all that stuff, and then make your little notes on there about where stuff's going to be at, etc. Um, and then going down all the stuff of what everyone's going to be doing. Me personally, I like using an opboard kind of format when it comes to incident briefing, just for the security standpoint of stuff. But you can kind of use this layout if you want. Same stuff, but I just like more of the operations order of things. Your organizational chart is going to be an important thing. Being able to identify who's going to be who for this event. And for this, what I mostly do for my incident briefings is I open up a PowerPoint and I'll do the op board or whatever. And then for like this organization tree, I will on the PowerPoint I'll put, like, for this block right here, incident commander or whatever, or planning, I'll put a picture of the person and I put their title above them or whatever. That way you know what their title is, what their function is, and what they look like. And then under that I'll put their contact information as well, or like their radio call sign or whatever. And again, like I said, you can use these kind of forms and formats from the ICS system, especially wanting to keep everyone on the same page. Um, your communications plan. Um, Again, that's an important thing if it's going to be a large event and there will be multiple people with different radios, different channels, etc. Medical plan, just another tree chart of who's who, and you can get these to be able to edit as you need be. You can add things in when you do an electronic one, so you can have less boxes than this and make your own custom boxes. This is just it's a message form utilizing the ICS system. Um, Typically, um, you know, messages like this aren't going to be done for events, but this is a way to have messages go back and forth between different entities like planning and operations and logistics and stuff like that. Um, Obviously, text message and email is probably going to be the most likely way of conveying a message um, in this kind of format right here. Other than that, it's going to be radio transmissions for the most part. Um, Activity log. So during the event, um, it may be important to maintain an activity log for security, and this could be something where the security manager can open up a note on their phone and then just start time stamping different little things as they occur throughout the night. Um, or depending on the size of the event, and you have in a operation center, you could have someone who almost kind of acts like a dispatcher in a sense, and they can maintain an activity log of all the stuff that's going on throughout the night. And then they could also be the ones who make phone calls for you. So you can, have security patrol call in to the operations center and tell them to notify police to come here, and then they would be able to maintain an activity log on that and make that phone call and note the time and everything that occurred. Uh, for the most part, this stuff it won't be needed or won't be utilized, but like I said, depending on the complexity and everything, you may need to institute something like this. But something simple like just having a opening the note on your phone and time stamping everything would probably be a good idea to maintain activity log for security. An expense report, again, this is only going to be for something that's for a very large event. Most of the time, all the expense stuff is already, taken care of. And when it comes to, overtime hours and stuff like that, at least from my standpoint, I'll just adjust the invoice for the client if security had to stay over for a certain amount of time. But depending on the complexity of the event, the different types of entities involved, you may have to have something similar to this or some way of covering what expenses are for what's going on. Again, this is probably only something for large events where hazmat or at least CBRN is going to be involved. Bomb threat, another big thing, or nothing, something for a large event. So this is what I talked about earlier: bomb threat standoff. Little diagram showing different vehicles, how much they can hold, and what your safe distance to be is. And then it just goes into references and bibliography, and then the glossary. All right, so this is pretty much the end of this document. So there's a lot of stuff here that it goes over, and the other document, I'm not going to get into it, but you can go through it. You can find it. It's all open source, and it has pretty good information in it. A lot of it mirrors what this is, but it's kind of more specific to law enforcement. Um, do not overlook the need for pre-planning an event. Um, as a security provider, don't overlook um, the need to properly inform and educate your client. This is stuff that they've probably never thought of. They probably never thought of having to come up with a plan about waste management. And is that a function of security? No, it's not. Like, at the end of the day, that's not a security function for waste management. But when it comes to the overall safety and security, safety is always going to be in there. That is an important thing because you need people to be safe, right? Um, and so little things like that is what you should be educating your clients on when it comes to planning for large events. And it's something that you can guide them on as an extra charge or because you want to make sure that no bad crap happens with your name attached to it. It's something you can kind of take on your own on some things and have certain things squared away. But the most important thing to do with planning is pre-planning and meeting with people and getting certain things squared away so that issues don't arise. And when it comes to large events, some of the biggest issues is credentialing, who's supposed to be where and who's supposed to be doing what. And then for alcohol stuff, the wristbands and stuff like that. I found that to be probably the biggest problems with events or biggest headaches to deal with. And if you do the pre-planning properly, you have those things set up, you meet with people, you identify like, hey, you're the only one who's going to be in charge of being able to say things or do things. Like, I don't care who from your organization has a high rank or is high up in your group. Like they're not going to have a say anything. It only needs to be one point of contact, and if you're going to have more than one, then at least no more than two. Because you start putting too many chiefs in there, that ends up being kind of an issue because then everyone has a say on what they want to do. All right, so that's it for planning for security for large events. If you like what you hear and see, go ahead and give me a like and a share. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more videos. Earl Henderson, Primordial Defense. Thank you for watching.